Hello everyone and welcome to this guest lecture, An Introduction to Qualitative Research Methods. I'm Rebecca Pratt. I'm a PhD researcher based in the Department of Family Medicine and Community Health in the Program of Health Disparities here at the U of M. I'm sorry to be giving this virtually this time around. You're often one of my favourite classes to meet and interact with, but I hope you'll find this helpful and provide you with some good information and context about my approach to qualitative research. And as always, you're welcome to follow up if you've got questions or clarifications after this lecture. So our objectives for today are to provide an introduction to qualitative approaches and to give you some real world examples. We won't have an opportunity for hands-on learning this time around, but hopefully you'll get a good idea about the kinds of work that's possible with qualitative methods. I'm also going to be breaking this lecture up into smaller videos. So this is part one, and you'll need to return to Canvas to locate and play additional parts as well. So to begin with, I'd just like to talk a little bit about how I see the purpose of qualitative research. And in contrast with quantitative research, which is often in place to try to understand what may work or may not work, or if we think about the context of a clinical trial, does a particular drug or intervention have the effect that we're hoping for? Qualitative research is actually a little bit more interested in not just if something works or not, but how it works and how it might improve health or not, but the processes that are at play. The goal of qualitative research may not only be to answer questions, but to also sometimes generate further questions by gaining deeper understanding. And by doing that, we broaden the possibilities of what we know, and we broaden the possibilities of research. Some qualitative research is very much grounded in having built very good relationships and community partnerships with people that we might be engaging in our work. And I really think that for me, what I find so attractive about qualitative research is the power of stories to make change. We often hear in research, in the research world, how policymakers might be trying to implement changes based on some of the things that we've learned. And the first thing they always want is stories, and they want stories from real people who are experiencing the things that we're talking about. There's a lot of power to be had in sharing quotes from people about how different changes or policies or experiences might be impacting their lives. And so we know that qualitative research can have a very powerful role in communicating experiences and persuading minds and changing the public dialogue around issues. Qualitative research is used in a huge variety of contexts. Often it's got the shared experience of gathering the experiences of people that we may be working with or interested in, and gaining insights either into their own lived experience, their own experience of a condition, their experience of a policy, or it might be embedded in a randomized clinical trial type design where we might be trying to understand what was it like for someone to participate in a particular intervention. How did it impact their lives? And I'm just thinking about an example here of work that I've done around smoking cessation for people experiencing homelessness. We know, for example, in randomized clinical trials, we might designate a primary outcome measure that says if we're doing a smoking cessation intervention, the most important thing we can do is have people quit smoking. And that is true. But when we talk to smokers who are experiencing homelessness, they can also tell us how valuable it is to have reductions in smoking, or they can share with us how influential it is to be living in environments which might have quite high pro-smoking norms. So, for example, for folks who are living in homeless shelters, it can be even particularly harder to quit smoking in that context because smoking becomes a form of social currency. So we've learned by talking with people who are trying to quit smoking and living in a homeless shelter or experiencing homelessness that for them, reduction in smoking might be just as important as quit. And so that provides a challenge to the field. It provides a way to broaden our dialogue and our discourse around what are the meaningful units of change that people might have from their point of view, as well as how we might have meaningful units of change from science's point of view. Qualitative research often pops up in the context of mixed methods approaches, and we might see qualitative being used alongside quantitative work. Implementation science is another very good example where qualitative work comes into play, and again, that might be work where we're trying to understand if an intervention has worked, what did participants in that work do to make it work? What is it that people need to know if they want to replicate that work? Evaluation of services or interventions, participatory approaches to research, such as community-based participatory research would be a good example. It's quite commonly used qualitative research. And on the other hand, you might have open questions and surveys where people have been surveyed for quantitative perspectives on their lives or experience, but there's been open-ended questions as part of that. I think one of the largest examples I can think of in my own work is working with folks who, on a statewide survey of experience of people using food shelves, where and over 4,000 people returned surveys about their experience, and of that, over 2,000 decided to share in open comment fields their experience of their food shelf too. So we can have a huge range of contexts in which qualitative research might emerge. And in some ways, I like to think about qualitative research as having kind of 4 key ingredients. And the first ingredient that I would like to discuss is data. And data can take many different forms. We might immediately think of the value of interviews, where we might be talking to people one-on-one or 1-to-2, asking people about their experience, their lives. Focus group discussions are very common, where we might gather groups of people together to share in a collective context their experience. Again, that example of open-ended survey questions. But really, texts of any kind can be analysed in a qualitative way. Observational data can also be used, where we might be observing people and their behaviour in particular settings. Photos or still images can be used as a source of data, or indeed, video recordings. Online chats and tweets, or in this day and age, I know many people at this time are considering holding focus groups by Zoom, for example. Audio recordings, public records. Every time you participate in something like Twitter, for example, that's all publicly available. That is data that people might be collecting and analysing for research, or video recordings. So there's a huge variety of types of data that can be used, and often what we're doing in qualitative research is thinking about what's the most appropriate type of data that will help us answer our questions and further our understanding. A second very important ingredient in qualitative research is the role of theory, and hopefully you've read your readings associated with this lecture, and you'll see in there's a very useful critique of what happens when we use qualitative work in an atheoretical way. There's an enormous range of approaches of theoretical positions in terms of collecting and conducting and analysing qualitative research. This list is just an example of really just a few. And within each approach, there might be variations. So grounded theory is very common, but there might be the socially constructivist version of grounded theory. Phenomenology is very common, and then there's the interpretive phenomenological analysis approach. So there's an absolutely wide range of theories. And there's no particular right or wrong theory that can be used. Again, the theory that you'll bring into bear with a piece of qualitative research very much reflects the nature of the question and the nature of the inquiry. But there's a wide range of theories that are available, and they all have their own kind of perspective and their own epistemological underpinnings. A third really important consideration in thinking about qualitative research is the importance and the value of context. And often qualitative research is particularly concerned with conducting qualitative research to provide broader context. That example of the randomized clinical trial with folks experiencing homelessness and smoking is a good example of that. But also, we need to be sure when we're doing qualitative research how to provide context around what it is that we're doing too. So being able to share events or occurrences that might happen during data collection. An example of this would be I was interviewing a elderly man once about his experience of receiving a very advanced stage diagnosis of heart failure, which meant that he was really at high risk of dying in the next 12 months. And I interviewed him, and there was a transcript generated from our discussion. But one thing that was never apparent if you just listened to the recording and if you just read the transcript was partway through the interview is his 11-year-old grandson walked in the room and joined us, and it shaped the entire conversation, even though it wasn't necessarily apparent from the data we collected. So context can influence how we collect data. There's also really important context around when we conduct an interview study. Who is it that we do talk to, and whose voices are heard and whose voices are not heard? Qualitative research has the same vulnerability as quantitative research, in that sometimes we struggle to pay good attention to how inclusive we are broadly about engaging a really wide group of people and being able to participate in and share their experiences in our work. Other aspects of context are important, such as having transparency around the context in which the findings are interpreted, how the data was collected. One thing that you'll see in some of the qualitative approaches is that there can be discussion about the role of bias. You know, when we're collecting interview transcript type data or observational data, what about the role of the researcher's own perspective? Some qualitative approaches, such as participatory methods, rely on the role of the researcher, on the research teams and their experience as being an important asset for research. Other approaches try to find ways to mitigate that. So there's a very broad variety of views and approaches around this. A fourth key ingredient, which is very important in terms of qualitative research, is reflexivity. And by this I mean the role of you as the researcher, and how who you are may have influenced the process you've designed, the knowledge you've gained, how your identity might be different than that from the folks that you are working with or developing partnered work with or collecting data from. And how do you make sense of the world, and how does that influence how you make sense of data? And what is the role of the power you have personally and as a researcher, and how is that power different from people who participate in the work that you do? And that really it's a bigger question around also what is your position in the world socially, historically, and politically, and how might that be different from people that you are conducting research with or about, because all these things can influence how you might come to view or understand their experience. So finding a way to make sure that you have a good awareness of those factors for yourself. And in essence, I would argue that even though we have these very many different approaches, this role of data, context, reflexivity, and theory, in my view, often what we're doing in qualitative research is taking a collection of stories or experiences, and we might collect those in a range of different ways. We might hold that in a bunch of different outputs, be it text or recordings or whatever it is, and how we can find a way to share those stories with others that's both concise and engaging and has authenticity and integrity and does justice to the experiences that others have entrusted to you as you summarize and share those experiences in your own words. So for me, this is the essence of doing qualitative research well. And those four factors are for me key in terms of ensuring that that I do a good job in collecting information and sharing experience with others in a way that's meaningful and does good justice to their experience. And now I'm going to just pause there for now. And when I come back, what we'll do is we will go through a couple of case studies, giving you some information around some specific examples and how I've used these principles in developing different research projects that seek to answer particular experiences. So with that, I'll pause there for now and be right back.